Captain Threx gazed out the viewport as their ship, the Black Talon, drifted toward the human space station, ESS Harrow. Suspended in the black void like a lifeless hulk, the station had no glow from running lights or pulse of working engines. Just the haunting, dead silence that meant something had gone catastrophically wrong. Threx's mandibles clicked once in thought. Humans were reckless, but they didn't let their stations just die like this. Something was off. "This is a waste of time," Vrila muttered, leaning over her console. The tech specialist's scales shimmered under the dim cabin lights. "I'm telling you, the distress signal was a glitch. These humans probably just spaced themselves celebrating some bizarre ritual." Barak, their scout, gave a dry chuckle from across the cabin. "Humans do have strange customs. Last time, they tried to share nutrient sludge with me and called it spaghetti. I think they use food as a weapon." Threx snorted softly. "Stay sharp. If the humans are gone, something else might be waiting." Kezek, the enforcer, adjusted the charge on his plasma blade with a grim expression. "Let's hope whatever's waiting is worth the fight." The Black Talon latched onto the station's docking ring with a metallic thud. Threx's claws drummed against the side of his seat as the docking clamps locked into place. Their orders were simple: investigate the station, assess what happened, and report. If the humans were responsible for another mess, the Zathari would clean it up. If something worse had found the station first, well, that was where Kezek came in. Threx signaled the team to prepare for entry. They moved with the precision of predators, rifles primed, movements rehearsed. When the airlock hissed open, they were greeted by a wall of darkness. Even with their enhanced vision, the interior of the ESS Harrow was pitch black, the corridors swallowing light as if the station itself had grown hungry. "This place is colder than an abandoned moon," Barak muttered, his hand tightening on his pulse rifle. "Where's the emergency lighting?" Vrila tapped her wrist console, scanning for power signatures. Backup systems should have kicked in. Something killed the entire grid. "Spread out," Threx ordered. "We cover more ground that way. Vrila with me. Kezek, you're with Barak. We rendezvous in the central hub in 20 minutes. The teams split into pairs, boots clanging softly on the metallic floor. Threx and Vrila headed toward the command deck, navigating the labyrinthine halls with quick efficiency. There was no sign of battle, no bodies, no blood, just eerie silence, as if the station had been vacuumed clean of life. As they rounded a corner, the beam from Threx's rifle illuminated something strange. A collection of half-empty cups, food trays, and scattered decorations strewn across a mess table. Vrila crouched beside the mess, her reptilian tongue flicking in thought. "Looks like the crew was mid-celebration," she said, gesturing to a banner reading, "Happy Halloween," taped above the doorway. Plastic spiders and pumpkins were strewn around, almost mocking the dead silence that permeated the station. "Humans and their peculiar customs," Threx murmured, scanning the room with sharp eyes. "They celebrate fear?" Vrila shrugged. "It seems they enjoy making mockeries of dangerous things, strange species." Threx turned toward the doorway. Something about the mess unsettled him. The decorations, the spilled food, it all felt too normal, like the crew had been here one moment and simply vanished the next. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, even though his scanners showed nothing but static. Meanwhile, on the other side of the station, Kezek and Barak moved cautiously through the engineering bay. The flickering light from Kezek's plasma torch cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating shapes that seemed to shift and writhe on their own. "See anything useful?" Kezek asked, scanning the control panels with his torch. Barak shook his head. "Just rust and some strange symbols." He pointed to the walls, where several glyphs scratched into the metal glowed faintly, as if they had been recently carved. The symbols weren't human, nor were they from any language known to the Zathari. Barak's skin prickled with unease. He touched one of the glyphs, and the metal beneath it felt ice cold, unnaturally so. "These weren't made by the humans," Barak muttered. "They're too deliberate. Something else is here." Kezek stepped closer, his weapon raised. "I don't like this." Just then, a soft sound echoed through the bay, the faintest whisper of laughter, distant and childlike. Both aliens froze. Kezek spun, his plasma torch illuminating only empty corridors and scattered machinery. There was nothing there. Barak narrowed his eyes. "Did you hear that?" Kezek nodded slowly. "Something's playing with us." Barak activated his comm. "Threx, we've got movement in engineering. Possible contact." Static hissed in response. The comm line was dead. Back on the command deck, Threx and Vrila stood over the station's primary console. Vrila connected her interface module, fingers flying across the holographic display as she tried to access the station's logs. "This thing's a mess," Vrila muttered, frustration creeping into her voice. "Every system's corrupted. It's like someone intentionally sabotaged the entire network." Threx leaned over her shoulder, scanning the flickering screens. "What's the last entry?" Vrila squinted at the garbled data. "Some kind of video log. Looks like the crew was recording themselves." The monitor suddenly flickered to life. On the screen, a grainy image of human crew members appeared, grinning and holding up plastic masks. "Happy Halloween," one of them said cheerfully, waving at the camera. "And remember, whatever you do, don't turn off the lights." The video abruptly cut to static, and the console began glitching, flashing through lines of corrupted code at a dizzying speed. A chill ran down Threx's spine. Before he could speak, the console emitted a sharp, high-pitched whine, and the room plunged into total darkness. Vrila cursed under her breath, slamming her fist against the console. Something's overriding the system. A distant metallic clang echoed through the station, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, but not theirs. Threx raised his rifle, tension coiling through his muscles. "Time to move," he growled. Just as they turned toward the exit, the lights flickered, briefly revealing a figure standing at the far end of the corridor, its face obscured by shadows. "Who's there?" Threx barked, aiming his weapon. The lights flickered again, and the figure was gone. They were no longer alone on the station, and whatever had taken the humans was still here, waiting in the dark. Threx and Vrila moved through the darkened corridors like shadows themselves, rifles raised and senses sharp. The absence of sound was maddening. No hum of machinery, no distant clatter of boots, not even the whisper of recycled air. It was as if the entire station had been submerged in an ocean of silence, every breath an intrusion on the void. Threx glanced back at Vrila, her scales glimmering faintly under the occasional flicker of emergency lights. "Anything on the scanners?" he whispered. Vrila shook her head, frustration etched on her face. "Nothing. No heat signatures, no electromagnetic activity. Nothing alive." She tapped her wrist console, annoyed. "It's like the station's in a coma," Threx grunted. "Stay close." Meanwhile, on the other side of the station, Kezek and Barak navigated the winding paths of the engineering section. The walls groaned under the weight of the station's silence, and every step they took felt amplified, like intruders walking on the grave of something ancient. Barak glanced over his shoulder every few moments, unable to shake the feeling that something was watching them. "You're twitchy," Kezek noted, adjusting his plasma blade. "Relax. If there's anything here, we'll turn it into ash." Barak smirked, though his grip on the pulse rifle didn't loosen. "You sound more confident than you should. This place feels wrong." They reached the main engineering terminal, where dozens of cables snaked across the floor like discarded intestines. The console flickered erratically, struggling to maintain power. Barak bent down to examine it, noticing more of the strange glyphs etched into the metal. He traced a claw along the symbols, feeling the cold seep into his bones. "These aren't human," he muttered, more to himself than to Kezek. Kezek stood guard, his large frame casting long shadows against the walls. "So, who made them?" Before Barak could answer, a sound drifted through the corridor, the soft, rhythmic tapping of footsteps. They both froze. The sound was distant but deliberate, each step measured like someone, or something, taking its time. Barak's pulse quickened. "We need to move." Kezek nodded, but before they could retreat, the footsteps stopped, replaced by the faintest sound of laughter. A child's laugh, innocent and playful, echoing unnaturally through the metal halls. Barak's scales rippled with unease. "That's not right." Kezek activated his comm, trying to reach Threx. "Captain, we have movement. Possible hostile. Confirm position." Only static responded. Kezek cursed under his breath, the comm line dead. Back in the control deck, Threx and Vrila continued their investigation. They found more eerie remnants of the station's previous occupants, discarded costumes, party favors scattered across the floor, and food trays left half-finished. "It's like they all vanished mid-celebration," Vrila muttered, her eyes scanning the scene. Threx crouched beside a plastic pumpkin filled with candy, studying it as if it might hold answers. No signs of struggle, no blood, just gone. His mandibles clicked in frustration. "This doesn't make sense." Vrila tapped at her console, trying to access the station's internal cameras. "If we can get visual logs, maybe we'll see what happened." The screen sputtered to life, flickering through various empty rooms and corridors. Each feed showed the same thing. Nothing. No crew, no signs of life, just empty spaces, as if the station itself had been abandoned centuries ago. Then, one feed caught Vrila's attention. It showed the mess hall, where decorations still hung limply from the ceiling. For a moment, the feed was static. Then, something moved in the background. "There!" Vrila whispered sharply, rewinding the footage. The screen showed a blurred figure, humanoid in shape but moving unnaturally fast. It darted past the mess hall's entrance, its form melting into the shadows as if it were part of the darkness itself. Threx narrowed his eyes. What in the void was that? Vrila tried to enhance the image, but the console glitched again, and the screen cut to black. The console emitted a low hum, almost like a growl, before shutting off completely. "Something doesn't want us here," Vrila whispered. Threx stood, scanning the darkness beyond the control room. "We need to regroup with Kazek and Barak now." As they made their way toward the rendezvous point, the station seemed to shift around them. Corridors that had once been straight now twisted and turned, leading them in circles. Every step felt heavier, as if the station were actively resisting their presence. "Did we take a wrong turn?" Vrila asked, her voice tight with frustration. Threx shook his head. "Number. The station's layout is changing." He gripped his rifle tighter. "Something's playing with us." They reached a long, narrow corridor where a row of observation windows lined one wall. Outside, the void of space stretched endlessly, offering no comfort. As they walked, Vrila caught movement from the corner of her eye, a shadow sliding along the wall just behind them. She spun around, rifle raised. "Did you see that?" Threx turned, but there was nothing there, just the dark, empty hallway stretching into the distance. Vrila's heart raced. "I swear I saw something." Threx didn't argue. He had seen enough strange things in his time to trust a teammate's instincts. "Stay sharp, we're not alone." Meanwhile, in engineering, Kazek and Barak continued their search. They reached the reactor chamber, where the walls were coated with more of the strange glyphs, their glowing lines pulsing faintly, almost like a heartbeat. "This place feels cursed," Barak muttered, scanning the room with his rifle. Kazek grunted. "Cursed or not, we need to find out what happened and get out of here." As they approached the reactor core, the room grew colder, their breath misted in the air. Despite the environmental controls being offline, the cold wasn't natural. It felt invasive, like it was burrowing into their bones. Barak stopped suddenly, his eyes wide with fear. "Do you feel that?" Kazek frowned. "Feel what?" Barak didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on something behind Kazek, his scales bristling with terror. Kazek turned slowly and found himself face to face with a shadowy figure, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. The figure whispered something, a name, Kazek's name, in a voice that wasn't human. Kazek raised his plasma blade, but before he could strike, the figure melted into the darkness, disappearing as if it had never been there. Barak exhaled shakily. What in the void was that? Kazek clenched his jaw. "Something worse than humans?" The comm crackled to life, and Threx's voice came through, distorted but recognizable. "Kazek, Barak, report. Are you still in engineering?" Kazek activated his comm. "We're here. Something's not right, Captain. We saw something." There was a pause on the line. Then Threx's voice came through again, low and tense. "We've seen it too. Fall back to the central hub. We need to regroup." As Kazek and Barak turned to leave, the reactor core pulsed with light, briefly illuminating the room, and revealing dozens of shadowy figures, standing silently along the walls, watching them with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. "Move!" Kazek barked, his heart pounding. They sprinted toward the exit, the figures melting into the walls as they ran, their cold presence lingering in the air like a warning. Back in the corridor, Threx and Vrila moved swiftly, their weapons ready. They had no idea what was waiting for them at the central hub, but they knew one thing for certain. They weren't alone, and whatever was lurking in the station's shadows was just getting started. The sound of Barak's panicked breathing filled Kezek's helmet as they sprinted down the corridor, shadows clawing at the edges of their vision. The reactor room's door hissed shut behind them, and Kezek slammed the manual lock into place. Both stood still, panting, weapons drawn, but the air around them seemed heavier now, like something unseen was pressing down on them. "We need to reach the central hub," Kezek muttered, gripping his plasma blade tighter. "Stick close." They moved cautiously, every step deliberate. It wasn't just the cold that unnerved them, it was the oppressive sense that something was watching, waiting just out of sight. Barak scanned the halls constantly, his sharp eyes darting at every flicker in the dim emergency lights. They knew the station was supposed to be empty, but the presence they felt, it wasn't. Meanwhile, on the other side of the station, Threx and Vrila pressed forward toward the central hub. They moved in silence, their senses heightened, navigating through the maze of shifting corridors. The strange symbols continued to appear on walls and consoles, glowing faintly like whispers in the dark, but they dared not stop to investigate further. Threx's claws tapped rhythmically against his rifle, a habit of his when tension crept into his bones. Vrila kept her console active, attempting to scan the corridors ahead, though every result came back the same. No signs of life, no heat, no movement, and yet they both knew they weren't alone. A sudden metallic clang echoed through the corridor, followed by the rapid tapping of footsteps. Both aliens raised their rifles, spinning toward the sound, but the hallway was empty. The footsteps stopped abruptly, leaving only silence in their wake. "Did you hear that?" Vrila whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her own pulse. "Yeah," Threx answered, his eyes narrowing. "And it's getting closer." They turned a corner, and there it was, the first clear sight. A shadowy figure stood at the end of the corridor, its body rippling like smoke, shifting between different forms. For a moment, it took on the shape of a human crew member, a familiar face they had seen in the logs earlier. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure melted back into the darkness, vanishing as if it had never been there. Threx exhaled slowly, his rifle steady. "That thing isn't just playing with us, it's studying us." Vrila tapped furiously at her console, trying to make sense of the readings. "It's not giving off any recognizable signals. It's like it's not even really here." "It's here," Threx growled, "and it knows exactly what it's doing." Before they could react, the lights flickered violently, plunging the corridor into total darkness for a brief moment. When the emergency lights sputtered back to life, the figure had moved. It was now standing halfway down the hall, closer to them than before. "Move!" Threx barked, and they sprinted toward the central hub, the figure's presence pressing down on their minds like a suffocating weight. Meanwhile, Kezek and Barak reached the central hub first. The large circular room was a nexus for the station's systems, filled with consoles, life support controls, and holographic displays, though most of them now lay dead and lifeless, as if drained of power. They set up defensive positions, rifles trained on every entry point. "I don't like this," Barak whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "It's too quiet." "Quiet is better than dead," Kezek muttered, though his grip on his blade remained tight. Suddenly, the room seemed to tilt slightly, as if the gravity systems were struggling to maintain control. Kezek and Barak exchanged glances. Something was tampering with the station. The comm crackled to life. "Kezek, report." Threx's voice came through, distorted but audible. "We're in the hub," Kezek answered. "No hostiles, but something is messing with the gravity. And the symbols, it feels like they're everywhere now." There was a pause. Then Threx's voice returned, low and tense. "We've seen it too. It's not human, and it's not friendly." Before Kezek could respond, the temperature in the room dropped sharply, frost forming along the edges of their weapons. Their breath came out in visible puffs, and Barak shivered despite his thick scales. Then the entity revealed itself. It began as a flicker in the corner of the room, a shape writhing just beyond the range of their vision. Slowly, it took form, a mass of shifting shadows, its limbs too long, its movements too fluid, and in the center of that writhing darkness, a pair of glowing eyes locked onto them. Barak's pulse rifle discharged instinctively, the blue plasma bolt tearing through the air. But the creature absorbed the energy like it was nothing. The light of the blast snuffed out in an instant. "Damn it!" Barak cursed, his voice cracking. The creature moved, faster than either of them could react. It lunged forward, and for a moment, it wasn't just shadows, it was a face, Barak's own face, twisted in fear and agony, staring back at him. The moment of hesitation cost them. The creature struck, wrapping itself around Barak's throat like living smoke. He gasped, clawing at the darkness, but it was too strong. Kezek roared in fury, activating his plasma blade and slashing wildly at the creature. The energy cut through part of the shadow, forcing it to recoil, but not before Barak collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. "Barak, stay with me," Kezek growled, pulling his comrade to his feet. Barak coughed violently, his voice hoarse. It knows our thoughts." Before Kezek could respond, the creature lunged again, this time targeting him. Kezek dodged to the side, but the creature's form shifted mid-attack, moving like liquid smoke. It brushed against his armor, and for a split second, he felt every fear he had ever buried deep within himself come rushing to the surface. He saw his homeworld burning, his comrades screaming in agony, and himself standing alone in the wreckage of everything he had ever cared about. The entity fed on those fears, growing larger and more menacing with every passing second. Kezek fought through the terror, his rage boiling to the surface. "You want to fight?" he snarled. "Come and get it." He lunged with his plasma blade, slashing at the creature again and again. The entity screeched, a high-pitched grating sound that reverberated through the walls. It wasn't used to resistance. It wasn't used to prey that fought back. Just as the creature began to retreat, the doors to the central hub hissed open, and Threx and Vrila stormed in, weapons blazing. The entity screeched again, recoiling from the concentrated firepower. It slithered back into the shadows, vanishing into the dark corners of the room. Threx helped Kezek to his feet, his mandibles clicking in concern. "You okay?" Kezek nodded, though his hands still trembled slightly. It got inside my head. It knows us." Vrila scanned the room, her scales glimmering in the dim light. "It's not just feeding on fear. It's growing stronger from it." Threx growled low in his throat. "We need a plan. Fast." Barak coughed, still catching his breath. "We can't fight it in the dark. We need light. Lots of it." Vrila's eyes narrowed in thought. "If we can reach the reactor and reboot the core, we can flood the station with light. It might be enough to weaken it." Kezek grunted. "Then what are we waiting for?" Threx glanced toward the darkened corridors beyond the hub, where the creature still lurked, waiting. "We move now," he ordered, "and we don't stop until that core is online." With renewed determination, the team prepared for their final push toward the reactor. But they knew one thing for certain. The entity wasn't finished with them yet, and the real fight was only just beginning. The team advanced toward the reactor, weapons raised, every step deliberate. The station seemed more alive now, like it was aware of their intentions. The walls groaned, and the symbols scratched into them glowed faintly, pulsating in a slow rhythm, as if the station itself had a heartbeat. "We stick together," Threx growled, leading the way. His rifle was trained ahead, but his senses were attuned to every flicker of movement around them. "It feeds on fear. We don't give it what it wants." Kezek grunted in agreement, his plasma blade ready at his side. Barak moved carefully behind him, still shaken but determined to see the mission through. Vrila kept her console active, scanning the corridors for anything that might give them an advantage. "Reactors straight ahead," Vrila whispered. "If we can reach it, we'll have a chance." But as they pressed forward, the station shifted again, the corridors twisting and warping before their eyes. A hallway that should have taken them to the reactor now led to a dead end. The lights flickered violently, and the temperature plummeted, the air so cold it stung their lungs. "Damn it," Kezek muttered. "It's trying to keep us from the reactor." Barak scanned the area nervously. "It's not just trying to stop us, it's stalling. It's waiting for something." The walls seemed to ripple, and the shadows lengthened, stretching toward them like claws. Then The creature appeared again, emerging from the darkness like smoke curling through the air. Its form shifted constantly, faces and limbs flickering in and out of existence, some human, some alien, all twisted in agony. "Keep moving," Threx ordered. He fired his rifle, the plasma bolts searing through the creature's form, but it only shuddered and grew larger, absorbing the energy like a sponge. "We can't fight it here," Vrila shouted, slamming her fist against the wall. "We need the reactor online." The creature lunged toward them, moving with impossible speed. Kezek met it head-on, his plasma blade slicing through the shadowy mass. The blade's energy forced the creature to recoil, but only for a moment. "You like that?" Kezek snarled, his teeth bared. "Come back for more," the creature hissed, a sound that scraped against their minds, digging deep into their thoughts. For a moment, Kezek's vision blurred, and he saw flashes of his worst fears, his comrades lying in pools of blood, his world crumbling beneath him, and the suffocating loneliness of endless failure. "No," Kezek growled, forcing the images out of his mind. "Not today." Threx grabbed him by the arm, dragging him toward an adjacent corridor. "We can't keep fighting it here. Move." They sprinted down the twisting hallway, the creature trailing behind them like a living shadow, always just out of reach. The walls closed in around them, and the lights flickered in an erratic rhythm, as if the station itself was laughing at their efforts. Vrila panted as she ran, her mind racing. "We're not going to make it at this rate. The reactor room is too far. There's a maintenance shaft ahead," Threx interrupted. "It'll get us there faster." They reached the hatch, and Kezek wrenched it open with a growl. "Go," he barked, motioning for the others to enter. Barak slid in first, followed by Vrila and Threx. Kezek took one last look down the corridor, where the creature loomed in the distance, its glowing eyes fixed on him. With a final snarl, he dove into the maintenance shaft, pulling the hatch shut behind him. The cramped shaft was barely wide enough for them to crawl through, but it provided a brief respite from the creature's pursuit. Vrila checked her console, her fingers trembling slightly. "Almost there," she whispered. "If we keep going straight, we'll reach the reactor in under 5 minutes." Kezek grinned, though it was a grim expression. 5 minutes. Plenty of time to kill that thing. They moved as quickly as the narrow shaft would allow, the sound of their breathing loud in the confined space. The station groaned around them, the metal walls flexing as if alive. The entity wasn't far behind, and they knew it wouldn't stop until it had consumed them completely. As they neared the end of the shaft, Barak stopped suddenly, his body tense. "Do you hear that?" They all froze, listening intently. At first, there was nothing, just the sound of their own breathing. But then, faint and distant, came the sound of laughter. It echoed through the shaft, growing louder with every passing second. "It's in here with us," Vrila whispered, her voice barely audible. They scrambled out of the shaft, landing in a small access corridor just outside the reactor room. The door to the reactor chamber stood ahead, looming like a final barrier between them and survival. "Almost there," Threx muttered, rushing toward the door. But just as they reached the entrance, the lights went out completely. The corridor was plunged into utter darkness, the kind that clung to their skin like tar. "It's here," Barak whispered, his voice trembling. The creature emerged from the darkness, its form twisting and expanding, filling the corridor with shadow. It was no longer just a predator. It was a force, ancient and hungry, and it had grown stronger with every moment they had spent in fear. "Get that door open!" Threx barked, raising his rifle. He fired into the darkness, knowing it wouldn't stop the creature, but hoping to buy them a few precious seconds. Vrila worked frantically at the control panel, her claws flying over the interface. "It's locked from the inside. I need more time." "We don't have time," Kezek roared, slashing at the creature with his plasma blade. But every time he struck, the creature shifted, dodging his attacks like liquid smoke. Threx fired another volley, but the plasma bolts disappeared into the creature's mass, swallowed whole by the darkness. "It's too strong," Barak whispered, his voice filled with despair. "We can't stop it." "Yes, we can," Threx growled. He grabbed Barak by the shoulders, forcing him to meet his gaze. "Fear makes it stronger. We don't give it fear." Kezek grinned, his teeth bared. "I've never been afraid of the dark." With a final surge of energy, Vrila cracked the door's security protocols. "Got it!" she shouted, As the reactor room door hissed open, they rushed inside, slamming the door shut behind them. The creature shrieked in rage, pounding against the door, but it couldn't follow them inside. The reactor chamber was cold and silent, but it was intact. Vrila rushed to the main console, her claws tapping rapidly at the controls. "I can reboot the reactor, but it'll take 10 minutes. Then start the reboot," Threx ordered. "We'll hold it off until then." As Vrila initiated the reboot sequence, the reactor began to hum faintly, its core glowing with a weak, flickering light. "It's working," she whispered, her voice filled with hope. "We just have to hold out a little longer." The creature pounded against the door, its screeches growing louder, more desperate. "Let it come," Kezek muttered, gripping his plasma blade. "We end this now." The reactor's hum grew louder, the core's light slowly building. The creature screeched again, sensing the impending threat. Threx raised his rifle, a fierce grin on his face, for the Zathari. The lights in the reactor chamber flared, and the final battle began. The hum of the reactor filled the chamber, the glow from its core slowly intensifying as Vrila worked frantically to complete the reboot sequence. Outside the reactor room, the creature screeched and battered at the door, furious and desperate, sensing its end drawing near. "It's almost there," Vrila shouted, her claws flying across the controls. "We need 2 more minutes." "We don't have 2 minutes," Threx barked, keeping his rifle aimed at the sealed door. The shadows flickered beneath it, leaking into the room like creeping smoke, as if the creature was trying to force its way through the smallest cracks. Kezek stood beside the door, his plasma blade buzzing with energy. "If it gets in, I cut it down," he growled, his voice filled with grim determination. Barak checked his pulse rifle, his hands still shaking from the creature's earlier attack. "This time, we end it." The pounding on the door grew louder, the metal groaning under the relentless assault. Then, with a deafening shriek, the creature slammed through the barrier, tearing the door from its frame. Darkness flooded the room, twisting and coiling like a storm of living shadow. The entity loomed before them, a writhing mass of limbs, faces, and voices, all shifting in and out of existence. For a moment, it took on familiar shapes, the faces of comrades they had lost, the voices of those they had failed. Each member of the team saw something different, something deeply personal, something meant to break them. Kezek saw his fallen brothers, their eyes filled with accusation. "Why did you survive?" they whispered. Barak saw himself, cowering alone in the dark, the embodiment of his greatest fear, isolation. Vrila heard the desperate, pleading voices of her family, calling for help she could never give. Threx saw the shattered remnants of his past mistakes, missions failed, lives lost, and the weight of every decision he had ever regretted. The creature fed on their despair, growing larger, darker, more powerful. It lashed out with the tendrils of shadow, striking with the force of a storm. Kezek barely managed to block one blow with his plasma blade, but the impact sent him skidding across the floor. "It's too strong," Barak cried out, firing his pulse rifle into the swirling darkness. But the plasma bolts vanished into the void, swallowed whole by the entity. "We have to hold on," Threx roared, firing his rifle in controlled bursts, trying to drive the creature back. "Vrila, how much longer?" 60 seconds, Vrila shouted, her voice strained with effort. She could feel the pressure building in the room, the darkness closing in, the entity's hunger intensifying with every second. The creature lashed out again, and this time Kezek took the full force of the blow, thrown hard against the reactor wall. He grunted in pain but pushed himself back to his feet, his plasma blade crackling with renewed fury. "You want to fight?" Kezek snarled. "Then fight me!" He charged at the creature, slicing through the shadowy mass with his blade. Each cut sent flickers of light into the darkness, tiny sparks of resistance against the overwhelming void. The creature howled in frustration, momentarily driven back by Kezek's relentless assault. Barak joined the fight, firing bursts of plasma to cover Kezek's advance. "We've got you, brother," he shouted, his voice filled with renewed hope. Threx stood at Vrila's side, guarding her as she completed the final steps of the reboot. "We can't let it win," he growled, his rifle aimed at the writhing darkness. "We fight together." The reactor core began to glow brighter, the light pulsing with increasing intensity. The shadows around them trembled, as if the entity could sense its imminent defeat. "It's working!" Vrila shouted, a flicker of triumph in her voice. "The light is destabilizing it." The creature screeched in rage, its form beginning to unravel under the growing light. But it wasn't done yet. With a final, desperate lunge, the entity surged toward Vrila, determined to snuff out the light before it could fully ignite. Threx reacted without hesitation. He threw himself between the entity and Vrila, taking the full brunt of the creature's attack. The force of the impact sent him sprawling, but he held his ground, his rifle blazing with defiance. "Not today!" Threx snarled through gritted teeth. "You don't win today." Kezek and Barak attacked from both sides, their combined assault driving the creature back. The light from the reactor grew brighter, forcing the shadows to recoil, their edges flickering and disintegrating under the relentless glow. "Reboot complete!" Vrila shouted triumphantly, slamming her fist onto the final control. The reactor roared to life, and a flood of blinding white light exploded from the core, filling every corner of the room, every hallway, every dark crevice of the station. The creature screamed in agony, its form unraveling under the onslaught of light. The shadows disintegrated, melting away like mist under the morning sun. It tried to reform, tried to fight, but the light was too strong. The entity that had haunted the station, that had fed on fear and despair, was torn apart by the very thing it feared most: hope. The room trembled as the last remnants of the creature faded into nothingness, its final shriek echoing briefly before silence returned. The station was still. The darkness was gone. The team stood in the blinding glow of the reactor, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Kezek lowered his plasma blade, his hands still trembling. "Is it over?" Barak asked, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. Threx scanned the room, his rifle still at the ready, but there was no sign of the creature, only the light, warm and comforting, filling every space it had once haunted. "It's over," Threx confirmed, his mandibles clicking softly. "We won." Vrila collapsed against the console, her whole body shaking with relief. "I thought we were done for." Kezek grinned, though his exhaustion was evident. "Where's Athari? We don't go down that easy." The team shared a brief moment of camaraderie, savoring the victory they had fought so hard to achieve. The weight of the station's darkness had lifted, and for the first time since their arrival, they felt the light on their faces. As they made their way back to the central hub, the reactor's glow followed them, illuminating every corridor, every room. The symbols on the walls had stopped glowing, their power snuffed out along with the creature. They reached the docking bay, battered but victorious. The black Talon was waiting, its sleek form gleaming under the station's restored lights. "Time to go home," Threx said, his voice steady. They boarded the ship, and as the docking clamps released, the station slowly drifted away, a lonely relic once again bathed in light. Just as they were about to engage the ship's engines, the comm crackled to life one last time. A voice, faint, distant, and filled with strange amusement, echoed through the cabin. "Happy Halloween. Come back soon." The team exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke. As the black Talon disappeared into the vastness of space, the station lingered behind, glowing softly against the endless void. And then, just for a moment, the lights flickered, but only for a moment.